So as PJ said, I'm a family physician and I'm a researcher. I am director of the National Center for Deaf Health Research, and I'm with the Rochester Bridges to the Doctorate program. I'm the PI over at the University of Rochester, and I also work in the Rochester Postdoc Partnership. I think that's the new short name for that very long named program. And that's who I am for work. I actually decided not to include the slides of who I am outside of work. So how did I get here? So I've been thinking about this since I agreed to do this presentation. So how did I get here? So this is me and my dad. I just got this picture last month. My brother found it. So I guess, so what I want to point out, because people are a different age than I am, so this is a Polaroid. So this was when the picture came out of the camera after you pressed the button, and then you waited and waited and waited. Sometimes you had to peel, right? Had to wait for it to dry. And this bottom part probably had some real use, but in my home, my mother would write things there. And so I was curious looking at this that my mom wrote my name and my dad's name, I guess in case we forgot who we were. Very detail-oriented, labeling the specimen to make sure you know what it is. She put my age down 9 3/4 years. So need to be very specific. And then she put the date also. So sort of the duplication. So if you didn't remember when I was born, you could calculate that. So as I was thinking about how did I get here, I wonder how much of it I inherited in terms of detail-oriented, recording the data, being careful about labeling the specimen. I guess the other thing to mention, so this is my dad. So this is 4 months before he died. So some people think I went into medicine because my dad died at a very young age. Some people think I went into public health and prevention because my dad died at a young age. But the boy sitting there on his lap wanted to be a veterinarian. And that didn't change for a very long time. So how did I get to research from wanting to be a veterinarian? So this is a Belgian sheepdog. So for much of my high school, I worked earning money working at a kennel that was partially for boarders, but mostly it was a breeding kennel for Belgian sheepdogs. It was filthy, smelly work, but I loved being with the dogs. And one of the things I learned about from the experience with the Belgian sheepdog, so it's a big black dog. The males were about 32 to 36 inches at the shoulder, so up to my crotch now, taller than that when I was in high school. And they like to smile. So you have these big black dogs that are always showing their white teeth. And although they were the sweetest dogs that I ever met, people were always frightened of them. And so it was an interesting lesson for me about appearance and how people interpret something about you by the way you look. And I think that lesson stayed with me for a very long time in terms of how should I pay attention to how things are, and how should I pay attention to what assumptions I might be making about other people. And when I applied to college and I had to put down my work experience, I put down canine housing sanitation engineer. And the person who read my application worked in the veterinary school at the University of Pennsylvania. And when she saw me and met me in person, she said, "So you cleaned up dog poop?" Yes, but I didn't want to write that on my college application. So the other thing I did a lot of in high school was work on computers. And again, because I'm a different age than most of the people in the room, I should explain that computers were different then. So I used my money from the kennel to buy an Atari 800, which was mostly a video game, but I could program it to do things. And ours was hooked up to our television. That's not a picture of mine, but our TV was bigger than that. I mean, bigger, like they didn't come small. And then in high school, I worked on an Apple. Those funny things on the side is where you put your files and your disks. I learned a lot of programming actually on the Apple. And then my real job at the end of high school before college was doing programming at an engineering firm to help them develop tools that they could use with this new system called computer-aided drafting and design. So these engineers who were working with slide rules and drawing everything on paper were going to step into this, and they decided to hire somebody to do some of the software add-ons for them. And they had an ad in the paper, and New Jersey Institute of Technology was really close to their firm, and they got about 500 applications for the job, and they didn't know what to do. And the head of the firm was the ex-husband of my math teacher in high school, and she said, "You should just hire Steve and be done with it." And so they did. So actually, it was a good job for me. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? So one of the things I loved about computers was graphics. This is what graphics looked like when I was in high school. Not the ones that you drew with crayons, but the ones on the computer. Vector graphics, very cool. A lot of fun for me. But visual representation and how to translate things on the computer. These are not my programs. These are shots from the internet. But these are also the popular games from when I was in high school. So that's Asteroids in the lower corner there.
Oh, I remember that.
And this is another vector graphics. This is actually the first-person video game. So all the other games were third-person, where you could see what you were operating. This is the first one where you were actually supposed to be inside something operating it. But again, it was all vector graphics. So I never figured out in high school how to combine my interests of animals and computers, biology and computers. But it was something that I was interested in figuring out how to do. So I went to college, University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. My first job was here. This is the veterinary hospital at the University of Pennsylvania. So my work-study job was working in the emergency room. So taking the skills I learned as a canine housing sanitation engineer and bringing them into the hospital, where I got to mop floors and wipe down beds and hold animals while they were getting IVs and things started on them. And this was not like the vet offices I worked in or went to when I was a kid. This was a real emergency room. And I saw gunshot wounds, and I saw knife wounds, and I saw clinicians talk to families in a way that I never experienced before here. And I witnessed conversations between clinicians and patients about end of life that was really profound, and including the option in veterinary medicine to end suffering that didn't exist when I was in college. The other thing I came to realize with my discussions with veterinary students and vet techs and veterinary school faculty is that virtually all of them applied to medical school as a backup. In case they couldn't get into vet school, they applied to medical school. So at this time, there was about 125 medical schools in the country, and there was 23 vet schools. Most of them were state funded. I grew up in New Jersey, which does not have a vet school, so I would be applying to a vet school in a different state. So I wanted to be a vet. So I had talked to a counselor in college about my interest in combining biology and computer science, and for some reason that counselor said I should do an individualized major. Okay, I said. So he suggested some faculty I should talk to. I spoke with a researcher in the School of Medicine, George Gerstein, who had a neurophysiology lab about my interests in creating an individualized major for myself. Would he be my advisor? He was a PhD. His undergrad and his PhD were in physics, I think. And he said to me, this is spring of my freshman year, he said to me, computers are a tool. There's no reason to major in them unless you want to invent them or build them, which wasn't what I was expecting to hear. And then he said, do you want to work for me this summer? This is 15 minutes into the conversation. So I said, sure. So I didn't go back home again after going to college. I stayed at college forever. I got summer jobs. I worked in George Gerstein's lab until my senior year. And it was an amazing place for me in terms of development. So I got hired to do computer programming in the lab. So they did data collection, and they would plot to see if they could localize which neurons in the brain were firing based on a stimulus. And so their scatter plots would look like this. And most of the graduate students in this lab were actually computer science PhD students. None of them were physiology students. There were some MD, PhD people in there. And most of the PhD students were focused on computer vision, which is not, this was not a visual cortex lab. This was actually an auditory cortex lab. And they were doing something, edge detection. So how can you train a computer to see the boundary of something? So at that time, the state of the art was something called difference of Gaussian. So you could find the edge based on a gradient in color. And that's sort of what a map of a different of Gaussians. Later, it developed into what's called the Mexican hat or sombrero. So different ways to try to figure out where the edge is. So if this is what a picture looked like, if you ran it through an algorithm like that, it's probably not going to show up very well, but you can, the computer can find where the edges are. And so my job wasn't to develop anything cool like that. My job was to take what the graduate students were working on and incorporate it into a program that could find the edges on the scatter plot. So where are the boundaries between these two areas? This is so clean that it's easy to see, but sometimes they overlap. And so could a computer help the researchers identify? So this was an auditory cortex lab, and they collect so much data that I actually did not see data collection until I was a senior. So I started working them summer after my freshman year. I did not see original data collection until I was a senior, and it was awful for me. They cut open the skull of the cat, they put the electrode in, they sew it closed, they protect it so the electrode doesn't get damaged, they put them in a soundproof booth, they play sounds for them. It was awful, awful, awful for me. I don't think it was good for the cats either. But again, I didn't see data collection until I was a senior, so I didn't know any better. So, and I wasn't doing biology. I was doing computer science in this lab. It just was in a biology building. So I decided to do an independent study my junior and senior year, and it was in physiology. And I connected with faculty who were focused on something called the carotid body. So the carotid body is a chemoreceptor that lives in the branch of the carotid artery on both sides. I can probably point with this. So this over here, that's the carotid body. So what the carotid body does is it measures oxygen concentration in the blood, and based on oxygen concentration, sends signals to your brain that then changes your respiratory rate, essentially. It does do some measurement of carbon dioxide in your blood also, but mostly it's an oxygen sensor. And I was just looking for an independent study project. I did actually not know a carotid body existed before that. And it was a controversial topic in the literature because there was two camps in the carotid body research world. There was a research world on carotid bodies, and there was enough of them that there was two camps. One camp said the carotid body got very high blood flow through it. And that's how it could work so fast to detect oxygen and signal your brain so you could do it. And others who were measuring blood flow said it was a low flow organ, which didn't really fit for how it would work, but it was what they found when they tried to measure flow. The challenge with measuring flow through an organ that small is that when you manipulate it to try to measure the flow, you might be changing the flow a little bit. So my job in my independent study included a lit review, and since we're a different age, this is what lit reviews look like. So when I was in college, the Science Citation Index was a series of volumes of books organized by author's name alphabetically, organized by keyword, organized by journal, and then a separate volume that said, of this paper you're interested in, who else cited it in that year? And so these volumes were on shelves, and there was different shelves for different years. And if you were looking for something published this year, they had a monthly supplement that came out that they bound at the end of the year. So this was a lit search then, and it involved 3x5 cards, and then you had to go find the journal, and then you went to the photocopier and you copied it so you could have it in your folder. And I actually like this. I had fun in the library looking for things that no one else could find because no one else looked. I probably still have 3x5 cards somewhere in my house that have this on it. Anyway, so part of the controversy in the blood flow was about the size of the capillaries. So is it possible that the carotid body has different size capillaries that would affect the flow through it? So the capillaries are the smallest blood vessels in your body. Usually where you change from arterial blood to venous blood, it goes through the capillaries. So I met with other folks who were doing measurement with something called microspheres. So tiny, tiny balls about the size of, I think the smallest ones I used were 9 micrometers, so tiny. And then what would happen is you inject them into the animal, they get caught in the capillary bed, and then, oh, I forgot the key point, and they're radioactive. So then when they get caught in the capillary bed and you take the tissue out and you measure the radiation, you know how much got caught in it. I clearly wasn't thinking this through because I would be injecting an animal with radioactive substances, and then to find out what was going on, I would have to cut out the organs. So anyway, what we found, this is a graph of some of the data. So The carotid body measurements are those last three. We used two different sizes for their report here. One was 15 micrometers and one was 9 micrometers. And so the blood flow, that's a measure of blood flow. The blood flow was higher with the 15 micrometer sphere, which suggests that the 9 micrometer ones were passing through the tissue and so underestimating the flow. So in fact, it was a high flow organ, but the other research missed it because they were looking for the wrong size capillaries. The capillary size doesn't show up as an issue in any of the other organs that we harvested, the word that's used. We cut out those organs. And it's important to measure right and left separately in case because you're injecting it in one part of the body, does it not distribute evenly? So my first publication, 1988, probably before many of you were born. I typed it up in a text editor because word processors weren't commonly used then. I typed it up in a text editor because I worked in a lab with computers. Then I printed it out. I brought it to my mentor's home. She was on maternity leave. She got out her scissors and some tape. And we actually did cut and tape to reorder my paragraphs. And that's how we did my first paper. So I rationalized my decision to apply to medical school by saying, I'm probably not smart enough to be a vet. I don't have a vet school in my state. And although research was fun, I wasn't so keen on killing animals. And although I could perhaps help more people if I did research, I really appreciated in the emergency room at the veterinary hospital the interaction with patients' families, and thought I would need that kind of immediate feedback to feel rewarded. So I applied to medical school and got in. And then I had to get a job to pay for medical school, well, to pay for part of it in addition to my loans. And I got a job in a lab looking at slices of rat brain. I didn't have to kill the rats. I said I wasn't going to do that. But I did look at their brain slices, counting dye in cells. It was incredibly boring. So even when I wasn't killing the animals, I wasn't really that keen on this kind of research. This is a graph of HIV infection. So I went to medical school 1986 to 1990, which is about the peak you can see on the graph here for new HIV infections. I was in Newark, New Jersey for medical school, which was an epicenter for HIV. About half of the adult patients I saw in the hospital were HIV positive. And a third of the pediatric patients I saw were HIV positive. This was in a time where there was actually debate about whether or not children could get HIV. This was, there was a description in the academic literature about what babies look like with HIV, and the description sounded what babies with HIV look like. They have a typical appearance, according to this article, and the typical appearance actually sounded a lot like what African American babies look like. And certainly in Newark, most of the babies we saw were African American babies. But so HIV had a huge impact on patient care and my interactions with patients. And so although the HIV that we know today is very different than the HIV from when I was in medical school, I still have this connection and this perverse connection with HIV in terms of an interesting story about experiences. So one of the challenges, so I was in Newark, New Jersey, which was very different than the part of New Jersey where I grew up. Newark is across the river from New York City, and as cities grow, there's decisions made for diverse reasons about where museums go and where culture and theater goes and where business goes, and all of that was in New York City. And Newark, after the 1950s, really had not much going for it. So what I learned from seeing patients there is there was actually no movie theater in Newark, New Jersey when I was there that showed movies that were not rated XXX. So the children I was seeing did not have an experience of going to the movie theater. Some of the children I saw had pagers. This was in the 1980s. I didn't have a pager as a medical student. Pagers were not common. They had pagers because they were runners for pushers, and they needed to be contacted quickly. So they had pagers. On my commute to and from medical school, no one in my class lived in Newark. We all left the city when we could get out. I drove past abandoned buildings on my way to my apartment every day. The Main Street steel gates would come down. It wasn't the steel gates I was used to from New York City. These were solid steel. You couldn't see the windows behind them. The whole city locked down at night. Anyway, so I started to appreciate that people had different experiences than I did. And I had some cross-language experiences in Newark. I had a family that lived in Newark. Their 8-year-old daughter was born in Newark, and the parents' only language was Portuguese. There was such a large, tight-knit Portuguese community on the outskirts of Newark that they could spend that much time there and not need English. And it was incredible to me that that existed in the same state where I lived. I had a little girl who was HIV positive who would teach me Spanish at night when I would round on her and check on her. She taught me body parts in Spanish. She laughed at my pronunciation, much like you all laugh at how I sign. Some of my interest in cross-language, cross-cultural things started here, because I didn't have much of that growing up. So my best experience in medical school was in a family medicine rotation. I didn't realize that till I was applying for residencies, and I thought this was the one rotation I really loved. And what was it that I loved about it? It was outpatient. The people I was working with knew their patients. They talked with their patients. So I applied for family medicine, which didn't really exist very much in New Jersey. There were, at the time I was applying for residency programs, there were, I think, 15 medical schools that did not have family medicine programs, and 13 of them were east of the Hudson River. So what the rest of the country knew about, we did not know about in the Northeast. So I decided I needed to go someplace outside the Northeast for training. And so Wisconsin was one of my top choices, and I went there. And Wisconsin, I learned a lot, but one thing I learned was about death. So when I was a second-year resident at St. Mary's Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin, one of the unit clerks in the hospital, who's a CODA, was teaching a sign language class at the local community college. And so he encouraged me to take his class. And so I took his class and said, "This is fun. What do I do next?" And he said, "Go to the deaf club. They have classes there." I didn't even know there was a deaf club. Deaf club wasn't something I learned in medical school. So this is a picture of the Madison Association of the Deaf on Willie Street. I didn't even know how to call there to find out where the classes were. I knew nothing. So anyway, so I got to take a class at Madison Association of the Deaf. I show up there at an event to find out more, and so I learned the medical model. So all of these people are there, and I can't communicate with anyone. And the people I can't communicate are all supposed to be disabled, right? This is the medical model. They can communicate with anyone they want, except for me. They may not want to communicate with me, and I can't communicate with anyone. And so this sort of experience of this is like when I travel outside the US and I can't talk with anyone. So why is this model different? Why am I learning something different in medical school? And then also the appreciation of, so the medical model is an individual model of disability. So you're disabled because of who you are or what you are, whereas the social model of disability is about the environment. So in this environment at the Madison Association of the Deaf, I'm disabled. The environment is disabling for me because I don't have access. It's not an individual ownership thing. And so that really changed my perception on many things. And the program I was in actually had a medical anthropologist work for the program. Some of you may know Nancy Chin at the University of Rochester. So the family medicine program there had a medical anthropologist, and she had a program to do cross-cultural teaching. And so residents would go with, work with different communities. There was a large Hmong, H-M-O-N-G population in Madison. There was other refugee populations there. There was migrant populations. So I went up to the anthropologist and I said, I'm interested in doing something with the deaf population. Do you think that would work? And she said, of course that would work. That would be great. So we talked about what to do, and she said, well, you should talk with the people at the Deaf Club about what it is that they think they want you to do. So she helped me with a meeting. We got interpreter services. They said they'd be interested in learning about medical topics. I have the anthropologist there to coach me. She says you need to find out from them what medical topics they want to learn about. You don't get to pick the medical topics. They get to pick. I worked with other residents in my residency program to do the presentations with interpreter services, very visual. So the Madison Association of the Deaf picked the topics. We scheduled them so the other residents had experiences. It was really a cool thing. It was a lot of fun. I wanted to teach about HIV. They were not interested in HIV. They had learned everything they needed to learn about HIV. They had other topics. Arthritis was the first one they wanted. Breast cancer was the second one they wanted. And that program continued for about a year after I left Wisconsin. This is Jack Barr. He was my first deaf teacher. I learned a lot from Jack. He's also a big advocate. There was issues with emergency notification. I learned a lot about community advocacy too. We had the Madison Association of the Deaf arrange for the fire department and the police department and the mayor's office to come talk with them about 911 access, which was incredibly frustrating. And someone from the mayor's office said that, so the TTY number was a 7-digit number and 911 is a 3-digit number. The Deaf Club said, we want our kids to be able to do 3 digits, not 7 digits. And someone from the mayor's office said, access is the same. So someone from the Deaf Club said, great, let's switch and let the hearing people use the 7-digit number and the deaf people can use the 3-digit number since access is the same, which should be easy to switch. They didn't go for that. Anyway, Jack is holding a device. So tornado warnings were an issue there because it was a loud siren and nobody knew it. So this is a device that actually would send a caption message to your house with what the emergency was. And you could hook it up to something that could wake you up, where there was a bed shake or a fan or a flashing light. So after residency, I actually stayed in Wisconsin for a year while I tried to figure out what I wanted to be. I did a lot of emergency room work in rural Wisconsin for a year. Actually, not a lot. I actually calculated my monthly expenses and then figured out how many shifts I needed to work. And then the chair in Wisconsin and family medicine used to be the chair in Rochester. And I did a presentation at St. Mary's Hospital on work I was doing with the deaf community, and Jack Barr came in with me to do the presentation, and we did a presentation to the residents, Jack and I. And so the chair, Gene Farley, said, you should go to Rochester. There's a lot of deaf people there. So I applied for fellowship in Rochester in something called family systems medicine. It's about how families interact around health and how health influences how families interact. So for example, in alcoholism, people talk about the enabler child, people talk about the hero child. So how families interact about alcoholism to perpetuate that system in the family. It's not as commonly discussed around diabetes, but if everyone pays attention to grandma's diabetes when it's out of control, then the doctor working with grandma to get the diabetes under control isn't going to be successful because the family won't pay attention to her. And so how do you intervene with families around health? So I thought learning about family systems would be interesting because of what I learned about deaf families when I was in Madison. So this issue of deaf children, for the most part, have hearing parents. Most hearing parents don't learn sign language. Those deaf children grow up, partner, marry other deaf people, have hearing children. And so what can I learn about what people know about family systems theory that might help me to understand health and healthcare with deaf people? So I thought this would be interesting. So I did the Family Systems Medicine Fellowship, and then I also had the opportunity to work at Folsom Medical Center. For folks who don't know, Folsom has traditionally been a place that has had accessible health care for the deaf community in town. When I was here, they didn't have, when I was a fellow in Rochester, they did not have sign-fluent staff. But while I was doing my fellowship, Tim Malia finished his residency. Tim Malia is a hearing physician who's sign language skilled, and he went to Folsom, and Tim attracted Carolyn Stern from Chicago to Rochester, and Tim and Carolyn created a much more accessible Folsom. And then Carolyn was pregnant with her second child, and so I was here, and so I got to do maternity leave for Carolyn. So I got to work in the practice for her second and her third pregnancy. And I learned some incredible things about taking care of a lot of families that were deaf. I think about a third to half of the patient visits when I were there was with deaf patients. I did not see very many deaf children. I mostly saw deaf parents with hearing kids. I did see a few families with hearing parents with deaf children, and I would ask just to learn, why here? And the answer was, we want a model, a role model for our kids. So we see Carolyn so that they know what they can do. Those hearing parents often couldn't sign very well, but they were smart enough, I think, to say, my kid should see a deaf doctor, my kid should know what deaf people can achieve if they want to. So Folsom was my downfall as a clinician. So one of the challenges for me at Folsom was that what I experienced at Folsom did not match what was being published about hearing impaired people and going to the doctor. Sorry, you probably didn't see me do the quotes around hearing impaired. Not my word. Published hearing impaired people and going to the doctor. And so in fellowship, I'm connected with very smart researchers, and I say, this is what I'm experiencing, and they're saying, this is what's published. It doesn't match. It's going to be hard to get a grant to look at something that everyone thinks doesn't really exist. The standard paper at the time, the one everyone looked at, was this paper in Medical Care, The Effects of Hearing Impairment on Health Services Utilization. This used national data, the National Health Interview Survey. 50,000 people a year take the National Health Interview Survey. They go into your house and they survey you. They measure your hearing on a subset, and some years they ask about hearing. So in 1971, 1977, they asked about hearing. And so this paper analyzed that data. So one was the finding that hearing impaired persons use significantly more physician services than hearing persons. So this is very different than what I'm experiencing in Rochester, where most of the deaf people I'm interacting with outside of healthcare aren't going at all. So how is this true? And then in the method section of the paper, the second part, they say they decided to combine unilateral and bilateral hearing loss together. So not only are they taking hard of hearing and deaf, the whole range, and putting them in one group, they're saying, they actually said in another paragraph I didn't put up that, and the driver is that you can't communicate, you can't connect, therefore you go more often. But it seems like unilateral and bilateral would be different in that respect. So how can you justify bringing it together? And they justified it in the paragraph above, which I think I cut off. They compared them and they didn't find a difference. So they decided it was okay to put them all together. And so they're reporting hearing impairment. So the challenge for me is hearing impairment's not a real group. So my challenge was to figure out what to do in order to demonstrate that my experience was a real experience. So there's splitters and lumpers, splitters and groupers. And so clearly the researchers who published that article grouped people together. So I needed to figure out how to split. And I'm not going to get a grant to collect data because what I'm experiencing isn't real. So I need data that actually exists. So as it turns out, the National Health Interview Survey in 1990 and 91 asked the hearing questions and actually asked questions that were meaningful for me. They asked about laterality. So how is your hearing in your right ear? How is your hearing in your left ear? So I could distinguish unilateral and bilateral. It asked for your hearing level. So I could distinguish deaf, hard of hearing on that range. And it asked age at onset. So I could distinguish from the data who is 60 and deaf since birth, or who is 60 and deaf since last year. So from this data set, so this is just deaf people. And this is a graph of the deaf people in the data set. How old were they when they became deaf? Self-report. So 2 peaks, essentially. One is before age 3, which is really birth, and the other is sometime in your 50s. So those are the 2 peaks. So decided to split the data as deaf from before age 3 or deaf after age 3. So the next challenge is comparison. So, so my hypothesis was that the people deaf since birth will use healthcare services less than the people who are deaf in their 50s. But when I did comparisons of those 2 groups, none of them were significant. Very frustrating. I think part of the challenge was the groups were too small. So what I did was I compared the deaf since birth to the hearing population. My hypothesis was they will use healthcare services less than the hearing population. And I compared the late deaf group to the hearing population. I said they're going to use more. So when I compared them to each other, I found no difference. When I compared them to the general population, to the hearing population, there is a difference. So this is one example. So for smoking, if I compare the 17 and 19, I don't get a difference. But actually, when I did a multivariate analysis comparing the 17 to the 26, it comes out to be half. And when I compare the 19 to the 26, it turns out to be about the same. So late deafened people smoke about as much as hearing people when you adjust for age. That lower number there, the 19, is unadjusted, and that's probably because that group, the late deafened group, is much older than the general population. So if you take only the people who have been deaf later, that group shifts their median age. So their median age was about 65. The median age of the hearing population was about 45. The median age of the deaf since birth group is about 45. So the reason the 19 is so much less is because most of the smokers died before they got to be old enough to lose their hearing. So when you do the adjustments, you find this, that the late deafened people smoke about as much as hearing people, which would speak to smoking as a cultural practice. And the deaf since birth, the early deaf folks, smoke about half. I don't know why, but anyway, so figuring out who to compare with is important, as also deciding when to split, when to lump, and what to measure. So what to measure became important. So I have some data now that says we can do something, so what do we do? So that's some of the community engagement. So I did get a grant to bring people together to talk about it. Formed the Rochester Deaf Health Task Force. Wasn't all deaf. It was a group of stakeholders in the deaf community and in healthcare and in health research and in education, community organizations, came together for about a year to talk about what are the important health priorities in the deaf community. We spent a lot of time actually trying to decide who was in the deaf community and who wasn't. Are we talking about hard of hearing people? Are we only talking about sign language users? And I was pretty frustrated, but I had a great mentor who had done this with the African American Health Task Force and the Hispanic Health Coalition. And she said both of them spent the early part of their existence on that also. Who is in and who is out. So the African American Task Force was discussing, well, does that include Jamaicans? Does it not include Jamaicans? What if you're African and not African American? So they struggled with that also. And the Hispanic Health Coalition had the same struggle. So anyway, so one of the findings from this group that met for about a year was we don't have any data. We need more data if we're going to tell you what the health priorities are. And so around that time was an opportunity for CDC, from CDC to apply for a prevention research center. So we had this community engaged group already formed, and we submitted a proposal for establishing the Rochester Prevention Research Center, the National Center for Deaf Health Research. So NCDHR was established in 2004. Tom Pearson led the charge. He was a member of the Deaf Health Task Force that we formed. He said, this is great. We can get the center here. We can start to do some of the work. I've learned many things over the years. I've learned about the importance of team. These are some pictures of our team. Over the years, and team is broadly defined, right? So it includes all of the folks who help us with Deaf Trunk Hospital, the folks who help us with the farm stand, the folks who help us with the Bridges program, the folks who help us with postdoctoral fellowship. So So the Rochester Deaf Health Task Force said we need data. So what we told CDC we needed to do is we needed to develop a way to get the data. The telephone survey clearly was not going to work very well. The National Health Interview Survey wasn't so great for us. And so part of this first grant was to develop this interface, this computer-based version of the telephone survey. So CDC does public health surveillance through the telephone random digit dial. It's the longest continuous public health surveillance in the world, the largest public health surveillance in the world, and it excludes many people, not just deaf people. It excludes people with mobility issues who can't get to the phone on time. It excludes people who don't have phones. It excludes people who only have cell phones, so it excludes a lot of younger people. It excludes anyone with caller ID right now, because who would answer the phone if you didn't recognize the phone number? So we built this, anyway, we built this interface to collect data. It was a touchscreen computer, so we did the first deaf health survey in 2006. About 300 people locally took the survey, including more than 100 who came to the NTID alumni reunion, 40th alumni reunion. We had a lot of data, actually. We're still analyzing the data from 2008. Anyway, so we got a lot of data. I just want to point out highlights for me. So one of the highlights for me is, so finding health issues to address is really important. It's also important to identify community strengths. The challenge with health disparities is often we tell people what's wrong with them. We don't tell them what they're doing well, and we don't help them to identify strengths so they can help themselves. So half the rate of smoking. So this is Rochester data. The previous data I showed you was national data with questionable methods that showed the same thing, half the rate of smoking. So then you start to wonder, is it real? But anyway, so community strengths are important. And here's another community strength for us. So we were asking about violence. We heard that violence is an important topic. And so we asked the standard CDC questions on violence. One was about physical violence, and the other was about forced sex. And when we did our cognitive interviews, we tested the survey with deaf people before we launched it. People said, how come you're not asking about emotional abuse? How come you're not asking about verbal abuse? That is important. You need to ask about that. There was no national question for that. So we worked with it to develop the question in sign language, and then we translated it into English for the IRB. So actually, this is a strength. I have no comparison. There's no national data on this. So I can't compare. So this, sorry, the column, this is the Deaf Health Survey column. This is the telephone survey column. So we have no data because the deaf community identified something that's important to be measured probably for everyone, but we weren't measuring it for everyone at that time. The table was from a publication in a public health journal. So that communicates our findings to one audience, a public health audience. But we also created videos in sign language to communicate findings to a major important audience, which was the deaf community. And so this video was published by the journal as an appendix online. So in the same place where the English language journal article was published, you could link on it and actually watch a video in sign language explaining what was said in the article. So not limiting access to the research we do. So the Deaf Health Survey findings also identified priorities. We shared our data back with community. Community selected from their own data what were priorities. One was obesity. We did Deaf Weight-Wise, which was a randomized trial of a behavioral intervention. adapted for use with deaf sign language users. So it was a group intervention with group leaders. The curriculum was redone from a curriculum for hearing people. And this is what a clinical trial diagram looks like. Community is important. We decided we couldn't randomize people to nothing. Everyone had to get something that was valuable. And so what we did was we did a randomization of immediate and delayed. So half the people got it now, and half the people waited a year to get it. And then we measured everyone every 6 months for 2 years. And I don't have the data here, but important take-home messages. So for the first year, the immediate group lost a lot of weight. The delayed group also lost weight. So there's something about being motivated to join a research project that leads to some weight loss. So that's one important point about the importance of having a comparison group. If we had only done the intervention and it had worked, we wouldn't know if it was because we motivated people, because we brought them together, because we gave them information. So by having a comparison group, we can say, yes, everyone, well, not everyone, both groups lost weight on average, but the group that got the intervention lost a lot more. So the intervention worked. And so our next project was to do Deaf Weight-Wise 2.0, which is a similar trial in a younger age group, age 21 to 40-ish. And we also did a follow-up of the Deaf Health Survey in 2013, 2014, in part to measure surveillance, so hearing people get it over the phone every few years, so we want to emulate that. And also it gave us an opportunity to ask more in-depth questions about some of the things we found, like exploring the low smoking rate, exploring the obesity, exploring partner violence more. And so this gave us an opportunity to explore more. So I talked a lot about how I got to be a doctor and then how I got into health research. But why is a hearing person without a master's degree or a PhD leading part of the Bridges program at the U of R, which is focused on people in a master's program to get a PhD? And I don't have the answer to that yet. What I can tell you about what I've learned is, so I've learned a tremendous amount about community, about people, about health, about research. And so I think that's part of the charge of doing this work. Part of the responsibility of doing this work is building capacity, not only in communities we work with, not only communities I work with, but also other communities. So yes, the deaf community needs capacity building so that a hearing person doesn't have to be the leader, doesn't end up doing this. But physicians need to learn, and hearing researchers need to learn, and administrators need to learn, and funders need to learn. So there's a lot of education that needs to go on to help people understand this. So this is just a collage of some of the teaching and training that we've done, including some articles about the importance of training deaf people to be physicians and the task force report on access to healthcare careers. So one thing that's important is, from my experience of the things I've learned, is that reflection is important. So it's really important to know what your passion is and to figure out how to include that in what you do. I mean, I love what I do, but I think it would be really hard to do if I didn't love it. It's a lot of hours. There's a lot of challenging decisions to make about what to go to and what not to go to. My son, Elijah, who is almost 9 3/4 now, actually, one night asked me, he said, I was putting him to bed, he said, what do you want me to be when I grow up? I said, whatever you want. He said, no, really, what do you want? I said, I want you to be happy. He said, well, what do you want me to do? I said, I want you to do whatever makes you happy. He says, well, give me some examples and I'll tell you yes or no. I said, I want you to do whatever makes you happy. That's what I want you to do. He says, well, if I become a doctor, do I have to write grants like you do? And I said, no. He said, good. So grant writing is hard work, and my family knows when I'm grant writing, they don't get to see me very often. And so if you're not passionate about it, it's going to be really hard to miss family time to write a grant. Anyway, so know what you're passionate about. Include your passions in what you do, but it doesn't have to be the focus. So I have incorporated computers in what I do anyway, and so that advice from that college professor that said you don't have to major in computers because you like to work with them was true. And so figure out how to take the things you're passionate about and bring them together in what you do, as opposed to figuring out how to make your focus that. I think it's also important to realize what you don't want to do. And sometimes you have to do them anyway, but figure out a plan. I think another important piece that I learned about is the importance of measurement. So we need to think carefully about measurement, because when we publish things, it has an impact, and that impact is not connected to whether what you publish is accurate or not. So clearly this early paper that got me into research, it was an accurate reflection of the research, but it was not an accurate reflection of reality. So I think it's important to think about measurement. What is it that you want to measure? What is it that you can measure? And what is it that you are actually measuring? And understanding those things which may be overlapping but may be distinct is really important as we draw conclusions from our research. And then also figuring out lumping or splitting. Collaboration. So finding good mentors and keeping them. So mentors don't stop because the training program you're in stops. And find good partners to work with. Building great teams and sustaining them, be part of great teams, and communication is essential. And I find when teams don't work smoothly, it usually comes back to not having good communication, and if we can just revisit the communication, we can often address the things. So I learn from others all the time, and I'm always surprised by what I learn. But I think learning from other people's experiences helps me to appreciate diversity and gives me a better sense of reality. I don't know who this quote is from, and neither does Google. I look. They have quotes of people who have said it, but no one has ever attributed it to someone else. They've always attributed it to an unknown. Anyway, I don't know who discovered water, but I know it wasn't a fish. And what that means to me is, what is it that I can't see because I'm surrounded by it all the time? And often that's my culture or my lived experience. And certainly going to medical school and being in Newark changed how I saw the world around me. Going to Madison Association of the Deaf changed the world around me. Working with folks here in Rochester has changed the world as I see it in incredible and meaningful ways that have been great for the research, but great for my personal growth. And so I can learn from anybody. Sometimes what I learn from people is what I don't want to do, but I can learn that. I think that's my show. Thank you.